Today is August the 2nd of 2013. This is the weekend edition of Broad Market Trading Analysis here in Grok Trade. Let me start by inviting you all to be a part of the educational experience of Grok Trade. We are getting ready to have our monthly mentorship, online mentorship here on the weekend of August the 17th and 19th. You can get more information and sign up in our website, or just send an email to carolina@groktrade.com. Of course, do remember we also have the 101 videos and the 201 videos in our website. They are full of great information to get you to a better understanding of all the basics of trading. Oh, and by the way, my name is Miguel Vences. I am a trader, a mentor, and an analyst for Grok Trade. The Dow up 0.17%, S&P 500 0.12%, Nasdaq up 0.22%, and the Russells closing flat for the day. And the VIX 7.11% to the downside, which is a strong movement of support for this bullish move. And here is our daily chart of the S&P 500. Pay attention to these white lines. The white lines are my trend lines for the daily chart. So this upper trend line and this lower trend line give us a rising wedge, and that's precisely where we're trading right now. So we can potentially have another up session before we reach this level of resistance, and right above that level of resistance we have this yellow line, which is weekly, and the pink line, that is monthly resistance. So that is something very important to keep in mind. Now let's go to the weekly of the S&P 500. Yellow lines are my weekly lines of resistance, my trend lines. And just pay attention to this yellow line and this yellow line. Another rising wedge coming closer to resistance. Of course, we would have some space to go down before we challenge this lower line of support. But the important thing to keep in mind is how close we are to a strong place of resistance. And here's the monthly, another rising wedge. This is something we should not ignore. A daily rising wedge within a weekly rising wedge within a monthly rising wedge. So what does that tell us? That the closer we get to this moment of resistance, the chances of trending down to test the lower levels of resistance are a strong possibility. Now this is the monthly bar so far, and remember today is barely the second of the month, so we still have a lot of time to move up or down. Now the Dow, a rising wedge in the monthly, a rising wedge in the weekly, and a rising wedge in the daily. The Dow heading its head today to a daily and a monthly line of resistance. Just look at how close we are to this lower trend line, forming the rising wedge in the daily chart. Now the Nasdaq, also a daily rising wedge. In the weekly, a rising wedge, except that in the weekly rising wedge, the Nasdaq is already trading above this upper trend line, which means that now it is support instead of resistance. And although we do have this monthly line of resistance, we still have some space before we can actually challenge that level. So for the next few weeks, the Nasdaq, which by the way has served as the leader in this movement up, still has a little space to run. The question is if we will continue to be the leader in this movement upwards. And in the daily, also a rising wedge, in just like I mentioned, with the difference that we have strong weekly support in case of breaking this daily rising wedge with the white lines. Now here's the Russells. Surprise, surprise, a daily rising wedge, but we are very close to the upper trend line level of resistance. This week we saw the Russells being a little bit hesitant to follow the Nasdaq up, and this might be just the reason why. In the weekly, this line and this yellow line hitting our heads in the Russells in this weekly level of resistance, of course with the difference that it's got the monthly line, this monthly line, as support. As we can see here today, we do have this line to hold the Russells in case of a fall. So the markets continue to be bullish going into next week. However, as Des Woodruff would say, thunder in the distance. There's a heck of a lot of rising wedges, and as we know, rising wedges tend to resolve themselves to the downside. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend. And don't forget to come here to Grok Trade for the best education experience in all things trading.